everybody, this is Kayla, and today what we're going to be doing is taking elderberry hardwood cuttings and sticking them to root them into soil. So let's get started. Here we have a bunch of elderberry branches that we will be cutting into smaller portions in order to stick into some potting soil to get them rooted. The supplies that you'll want to have on hand are a good pair of pruners, a spray bottle full of alcohol to help clean those pruners, and then some soil to stick your cuttings into. So for hardwood cuttings, what we want to do is we're going to take these in usually late winter, early spring, and we want last year's wood, so the wood that is only a year old or less at this time. If you take wood that is too old, it's less vigorous and it is less likely to result in success. So once you find the appropriate age of the stem that you want to cut from, you want at least 2 nodes for hardwood cuttings that you're going to pamper, and you probably want 4+ nodes for any hardwood cuttings that you're going to stick directly into the ground and take less direct care of. So we want to look for good clean sections of wood where there is not a lot of damage. And for elderberry, this rule doesn't necessarily apply, but for a lot of species, what you want to do is cut right underneath a leaf node. So you see here the area where the 2 new leaf buds are coming out of, that is the node. And so we want at least one of these at the bottom and one at the top. I like to cut directly underneath one node at the bottom and directly over one node at the top. If you leave any excess wood between nodes up at the top, this wood's gonna end up dying back anyways, and then it sort of serves as a way for pests and diseases to take advantage of the cutting. You don't want to cut too close to the node, but about half an inch or so away from the node up top. It's pretty important to face the cutting in the direction it was growing. So as we can see here, these leaf nodes are pointed in one direction. So make sure you take note of which direction the nodes are pointing so that you can get them faced with the bottom node buried in the soil and the top node sticking out. Elderberry is a particularly vigorous plant, and it will start rooting from anywhere along the stem, so you don't necessarily have to cut it on a node, but that is good practice, especially if you're working with like a lot of species at the same time. More sensitive species do require being cut pretty close to a node at the bottom. So then at this point, we want to trim away any excess wood, any little twigs. We want our stems to be about a pencil's width in diameter, maybe a little bit bigger, but not really too much smaller. If they're too much smaller, there's just not going to be enough energy in that cutting to push out new roots and new stems. So about the size of a pencil or a little bit thicker is a really good width to aim for. So then we want to cut it down into, so here we are doing 2 nodes per cutting, one at the bottom, one at the top, maybe 2 to 3 depending on how closely spaced they are. And we're going to take pretty good care of these and baby them, so it's okay that they're fairly short. It's good to sanitize your pruners in between each different shrub that you take cuttings from and you make cuttings from. This is just to prevent the transmission of diseases between plants. It's a pretty tender time for a plant when you take a cutting of it and are rooting it, and they're pretty susceptible to pests and diseases at that point. So we just want to give them the best chance possible by making sure that we're using clean equipment in this process. These pots have just regular old potting soil in them with a little bit of fertilizer. We want well-draining potting soil if you are going to be placing them in pots. If you're putting them in the field, they kind of get what they get. But for pots especially, we want to make sure we're using well-draining soil and not just putting field soil into a pot, because that poor drainage is going to cause a lot of problems for you. Now that we have our cuttings made and stuck into some soil, we just have to wait until they start growing. So keep an eye out for these guys to become available sometime, probably in 2025. If they grow super, super fast, maybe the fall of 2024, but more likely 2025.